Good morning and welcome everyone. I'm delighted to invite you to the opening session on day one of Digital Twin Week 2020. My name is Adam Beck. I'm Executive Director of the Smart Cities Council in Australia and New Zealand. And Digital Twin Week is part of another event that we've been running over the past 8 months, which is Smart Cities Week. We've got 2 hours with you this morning and we have a couple of sessions that we want to get through. So we're going to jump straight into it. But first of all, just a couple of housekeeping matters and introductory comments. Firstly, Digital Twin Week is exactly that. It is a week-long celebration of everything digital twins. You can see up there on the screen in front of you a whole range of sessions that we have on offer, and they're all different. We have networking sessions, we have rapid case studies, we have roundtables. We go live to the US tomorrow morning, to the UK on Thursday night. We hear from friends abroad. We have projects being showcased not only where I am based here in Australia, but also, of course, in our broader region, including New Zealand. So I encourage you to head to digitaltwinweek.com and have a look through what's on offer on the program. We hope to see you in another session or two over the next few days. We've currently got 1,300, just over 1,300 people registered across all of those sessions, and we're ecstatic with that result, this being our first year, our inaugural Digital Twin Week. 2 sessions this morning in our State of the Nation. Firstly, we're going to have some industry reflections. I have my panel that I'll be introducing very soon, but also in the second hour, I'll be handing the moderator reins over to Kate Williams, who will then sort of go forward and bring some new guests into the session where they'll be talking around activating spatially enabled digital twins, the role of government and also industry. So looking forward to that second hour as well. We're using the GoToWebinar platform. For those that aren't familiar with it, you'll find some basic functionality in there. The key one that we'd like to highlight for you is the Q&A box. Now that's up and running, it's live. Very much encouraging you to put your questions in at any time. When we get into the dialogue, we'll be dipping into those and of course asking them to our panelists. Also, this recording will be up on the Digital Twin Hub this time tomorrow. You can also head to our YouTube channel where you'll find not only this recording tomorrow, but a whole range of digital twin sort of interviews that we have up there. And if you're not subscribing to the Digital Twin Hub and our Digital Twin News, make sure you head to the hub, digitaltwinhub.org. So let's jump into our first conversation straight up. Julian Watts, Director of KPMG, Kate Williams, Chief Business Officer at FrontierSI, Richard Ferris, Head of Podium and Vision and Create at Lendlease, Gavin Cotterill, Consulting Director, Asia Pacific, PCSG, and Keri Niven, Digital Practice Leader at Aurecon. Friends, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thanks, Adam.
That's your cue to say thanks, Adam. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Good morning.
So friends, and for our audience, what you have in this first session are a selection of representatives from the Smart Cities Council Digital Twin Task Force who have been working away on a range of digital twin activities that the Smart Cities Council is facilitating. First of all, we're going to make some opening statements here. Digital Twin Week is pretty much almost to the week 1 year since we hosted the Digital Twins Symposium, which was in Sydney on the 1st of November last year. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask each of you in turn to give a bit of an opening statement, sort of reflecting on the last year, all things digital twin. Kate, we might kick off with you. Can you give me your opening statement? Where have we been? What's happened over the last 12 months in your world, or more broadly in industry and government, in all things digital twin? Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Well, I've been reflecting a little bit on what I loved about the symposium last year, and for me, one of the highlights was spending time with people from sectors and industries that I haven't spent a lot of time with. The construction industry, people that work in IoT, developers, people like Richard from Lendlease, and that was really one of the first times that I'd spent, a whole day talking about digital twins with people not from the spatial domain. And I think that has really continued in the past year. So we have, in my previous role in the State Government of Victoria and in my current role, I really feel that Digital Twin has been a way to connect all of our industries together, because, you know, digital twins are about that full ecosystem, and for me that's only expanded over the year. So really I've seen that momentum continue.
Thanks, Kate. Richard, obviously a lot of change in your world at Lendlease around digital twin. What's your sort of opening comments and remarks around the past 12 months?
Yeah, well, I would say that our industry is action orientated, but it's always time poor and margin constrained. So there's always a tendency to jump quickly from ideas to execution, and applied R&D has not typically been the path to new ideas. Of course, there's exceptions to this. So we know there's lots of venture capital has been secured and lots of bright construction ideas. But sometimes post-mortems, right, of this highlight some fundamental issues that are not considered. So I think we've got this really exciting time ahead of us with the onset of, you know, what this can do to us, but we've got to make sure that we change and apply the technology with process and with business transformation as well.
Yeah, okay. Great points, Richard. Thank you for that. Julian, let's head to you. The last 12 months on digital twin.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, team. I'd probably say I'm going to do the three things, right? So I've probably seen lots of asset owners, consultants, technology companies, operators doing three things: preparing, enabling, and organizing, right? So we've been preparing things. We've been getting business cases over the line to get the funding to really get this thing kicked off. We've been doing more pilots. We've been finding out that it's easy to start up, it's hard to scale up though. The tech companies have been busy renaming everything they do to digital twins, so it's just got the badge on it, which is exciting, but it's also a little bit, you know, challenging as well. I think we've been enabling things, so there's lots of enabling tech that's enabled digital twins to really take off. So all of that underlying AI, ML, you know, AR, VR, cloud, all of those have come a long way. And we've also been enabling ourselves with a whole lot more data. So lots of data collection, data cleansing, really understanding what data, you know, improves decision makings. And the other one is organizing. So organizing, getting our strategy, right? So our digital twin strategy, the ISO committee getting busier, what's happening in the CDBB with the national strategy over there, lots of digital twin working groups, trying to organize ourselves and figure out how do we get ourselves better structured. So those are my three.
Yeah, okay, and a lot there. Keri, let's head over to New Zealand and hear from you. The last 12 months, what type of reflections would you want to share with us?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, certainly as a consultant to clients who are working on building their own digital twins in some way, shape or form. I think I've really seen a shift from the definition, so lots of discussion about what is a digital twin and what could it mean to us, onto a journey. So we're really starting to see our clients now and the people that we work with are, the first part I guess is accepting or gathering an understanding of where they are on their own particular journey, and then starting to pull some actions against how they progress that forwards. And I think the real recognition has come when you say, are we building a digital twin from scratch? Are we creating new assets, as opposed to some organisations who are retrospectively trying to capture and create a digital twin using their existing assets? And I think that's been really fascinating for me, is to watch these organisations. They're starting to realise that any sort of advances in their own journey is really down to the maturity of their people, so how they're transforming the business. And I think, as Richard said at the start, it's that intersection between people, process and technology. It's, you know, as a digital technologist with a, you know, strong spatial background, it takes a lot for me to now recognise it's actually really seems to me about people, increasingly.
Yeah, good points, Keri. Thanks for sharing. Gavin, lastly, over to you. What can you sort of reflect upon and share over the last 12 months, all things digital twin?
Yeah, I echo all my fellow panelists' thoughts in terms of where we're actually at. I think it's quite interesting to see. We kicked off the session last year in Sydney, and we had the morning session to bring together a bit of showcase from federal, state and local council, and then in the afternoon it was fantastic to to be able to bring different stakeholders into the room to discuss about what's next. So if I reflect on really what's happened next, I think we've seen state government move forward with understanding why they need to do this. And I think what really I see is really valuable is moving not away just from the big build construction, bringing together the service delivery and the OPEX. So we're lucky enough with our UK operations delivering digital twins for the major infrastructure owner operators. And then now we're starting to see our clients here in terms of understanding what that value of data and perhaps moving that whole digital twin initiative away from just a 3D geometry perspective, but how data can inform business decisions, whether that's from maintenance or operations, to start to believe really about that value of data to support better decision making. So we're seeing a shift in client maturity, but I still think we've got a long way to go that organizations and owner operators need to understand what the commercial and strategic value of data is, as opposed to just a technical narrative, which we're still in that state at the moment.
Gavin, thanks for that. And I'd like to leverage off that last point that you made in terms of digital twin, sort of a technical narrative versus more of a sort of an operational service delivery policy narrative. Opening up to the panel now, not directing this question at anyone in particular, are we feeling, the collective we feeling, that our level of maturity in Australia and New Zealand is advanced as it could be potentially when compared to some of our sort of fellow digital twin enthusiasts and policymakers and practitioners overseas? I mean, Julian, you mentioned and you referred to the Centre for Digital Built Britain. You know, their national government doesn't get any higher than that. The national government has a very clear digital twin mandate with funding and resources. Where would you say we are at in the region when it comes to sort of some clear national direction around what digital twin is and what the value is? Does anyone dare to comment on that one?
You called me out, so I'll jump in. I actually think we're pretty well advanced. So on two parts of your question, one was, are we organised and do we have governance in place? Not that much, but you know, we're on the right trajectory. We're getting there. We're starting to get a bit more structured around it. But what I do see, you know, as a global organisation, I get reached out to all the time from other parts of the globe, going, "What's happening in digital twins? You're creating all this content. Tell us about it. Try and, you know, get us a leg up." And so I think we're seeing that in Australia we are actually creating a lot of good ideas, and we're triggering a lot of things. We're able to start structuring those into what's the use case of, you know, the library of use cases that we can start to build out. And that's, you know, that's where a lot of people are. They just want to try things out. They want to understand where the boundaries of this, what can I do, what can't I do, where's the opportunities. And I think that's where we've got a lot to say, and we don't have to be 100% organised and all the ducks to be lined up to be able to do those things.
Yeah, okay. Anyone else want to comment or supplement that?
Could I add to that, Adam?
Yeah, go, Kate.
Yeah. Look, I think I totally agree with you, Julian, and I think in Australia, definitely 12 months ago, we were more piloting and tech focused, like you mentioned, Gavin, showcasing, helping open up people's minds to what it could do. I really feel like there's some great examples now where we're seeing those use cases really strongly driving further projects in digital twins. So not all of them are going to be fully operational. A lot of them are still proof of concept, but they've built on those tech for tech's sake pilots, and they are being driven by the users, by people that want to see if it can help in a particular planning process, for example. And I do also want to say that in Australia, especially at the state level, there's a lot of really good discussion and leadership in digital twins. New South Wales, I'm sure everybody's thinking about the work that Minister Dominello's been doing, and that is driving some use cases that I think, you know, the scale that they're at, and also the reasons and how they're going to be used are going to be really interesting on the world stage.
Can I ask? Oh, sorry, Gavin, did you want to comment on that?
No, just want to build on Kate's point. So you mentioned about New South Wales. So I think that's a really good example. So I think there's some really good, what I could call bottom-up proof of concept work that's going on with Fisherman's Bend, with some of the work that was been done in Queensland, obviously here in Victoria and New South Wales. But I think that's really important to evidence the value of this. And Julian said in terms of, and Kate, about use case, it's for how to bring this to life in terms of, and what we see is the use of demonstrations or proof of concept to support business cases to understand. So you've got that sort of bottom-up engagement, understanding what that is. But equally, what we need more is that top-down governance approach. If we're going to build capacity and capability and to help support and bring policy themes to life, we're going to need to bring data into that narrative. We're not going to be able to do that by doing bespoke projects sit within departments. We need to have a broader strategic approach in terms of to build that capacity, because government's really complex. And if you start to bring together different data sets from different departments to do simulation and analysis of that to give you better decision making, that's going to take a broader initiative, and one of which New South Wales has got to be commended in terms of taking that leadership route. So there's still opportunity for the other states. I think that's a really good flag on the hill for us to look at from New South Wales perspective.
I'd like to ask the audience now to open up a browser in their smartphone or on another device. We wanted to ask a few questions to inject some real life sort of thinking into this conversation for those that haven't used the Mentimeter platform. It's pretty straightforward. Head to a browser, menti.com. There's a code there, or you can just use the QR code that's up on your screen now. We've got a number of people that are sort of voting away already. We've only got 3 questions. The first one is sort of up and available now at the moment. Just keen to know who's currently working actively in digital twin. We'll sort of let that go for a little bit. We got over 150 people on the line, so looking forward to getting some good input to that one. Let me, while that's going away in the background, let me build off the data comment. Panel, do you think not ourselves as policymakers and practitioners around digital twin, do you think the broader industry realizes that really the digital twin is a data play? It's data at its heart, or are we still sort of coming from that sort of digital model, sort of BIM thinking and sort of adding on to it? Where do you think our understanding is around what the digital twin actually is, in lieu of standards, of course, that we don't really have at the moment? Does anyone want to comment on that? Like when you're at a party and someone says, "What do you do?" "Oh, I'm into digital twin." "Oh, what's that?" You know, what's the comment around data versus whatever? Richard, yes.
I'll take a stab, and I think Julian made an interesting comment where people are badging digital twins on a whole heap of stuff, right? And the first thing is absolutely about data, absolutely, and it's about making, and I think Gavin mentioned it or alluded to this as well, that what you're using it as a resource to make decisions, right? And you can just consume that digital or virtual representation, right, to make decisions. So the richer you make that data, the better decisions you will ultimately make. So yes, the digital twin is all about the idea that you create that data bank to make decisions, but then you then link it to the physical asset, right? And so therefore the twin thing comes in, right? It's actually twinned, and that's the key. So when you're creating it in its virtual form, it's the nascent side, right? It's full of development and potential there. But then when you link it to the physical side, the things twin up, and then you've got basically the virtual and the physical, and you're optimizing your decision base. And you're right, Adam, it's all data, and you can consume it, you know, virtually, or actually, you know, through a geometric model, or you can go to a bunch of dashboards, of course.
So how long can we go without standards?
Until what, Adam?
Well, just how long can we go? I mean, can we get through this without having a rule book?
Well, I think, look, it's really, the term digital twin is being used so broadly now, isn't it? I think we all recognise, so whether we talk about spatial digital twin, whether we talk about companies who are rebranding, building information modelling, laser scan, it's everything's a digital twin at the moment. So I think what we need to look at is entirely what the capability, and plugging our guidance notes, Adam, and we talk about what capability does digital twin provide. So are you able to connect, integrate, visualize, analyze, and simulate secure data sets? So understanding what that capability is then. So from my perspective, we need to have a strategic standard, not a technical standard at the moment, because we're not looking to connect twins from a technical ontology perspective. We really need to get a strategic standard to really provide that strategic context, so we have a consistent narrative in the market. It's a bit like the smart cities narrative. There was ISO 37000 series, smart cities vocab. Who uses it, Adam? Very, very, very few. So I think it's really important, not only that we need to create a standard, but we also need to be able to utilize that. And this is where standards from a top-down perspective to build that capacity and capability and enable that consistency needs to happen. And obviously, Centre for Digital Britain are about to launch their digital twin standards roadmap, which contains that strategic, process and technical layer. So in answer, that was a long way of answering your question. Standards are really important, but we've got to be really clear about how we're going to use them. Otherwise, they'll become another standard that sits on the shelf that people don't use. Yeah, just on. Sorry, Julian. Yes.
I was going to say, I think you make a really good point about standards are important, and is it one standard for digital twin, or is it how do we bring together the existing suite of standards? When we talk about data is the big number, and there's so many data standards, and if we're going to use like fast moving data, then there's IoT standards. If we're going to use 3D data, then there's already geometric standards. So how do we bring all of those standards together so that we are collating data in the right way, but then we've got the standard that helps us, different types of standards that helps us collate that from a business architecture perspective or a sector architecture perspective, or how do we join those together? And it may not be one standard when we're thinking about that.
Yeah. Sean makes a good point here around digital twin, confirming also the views of the panel around it being about data. He does ask a really good question. What are the panel's views about open data standards and consistent taxonomies? Who wants to talk to us about the intersection of digital twin and these other really important sort of, I suppose, supporting agendas around open data, shared data, data exchanges? Anyone want to go there?
I can have a
does the digital twin trump it all?
I was sort of smirking as you were just answering the previous question, because it almost seems like we need a framework for our standards, and that sort of brings them together. And I've been wondering for a while now whether a digital twin standard is needed in its own right, or whether it's actually a part of all of these other standards that are currently existing. But what's missing is the framework. And so I wonder, in New Zealand, the Treasury's the National Infrastructure Plan, it does talk about the importance of national shared and open data standards for infrastructure. And that's kind of, it's one of the key focus areas of that plan. And to me, that's the highest point in the framework that says, okay, here's our strategic priorities as a country. How are we going to move towards that? And maybe one of the examples is the Waka Kotahi AMDS, the Asset Management Data Standard, that's been it's partially released, and it's it's out for consultation and to be released formally next year. I wonder if that is what we're seeing as one of the first interpretations of the need for a standard that gives that national scale consistency. What I really like about that approach is it is an ontological taxonomy, which is a couple of fantastic words from Monday, isn't it? But that it relates everything to everything else, basically. And that I'm wondering if in the medium term that's actually going to give us that connectability, because it is at a national scale. It's taking things like national infrastructure that most other things connect with or hang off at some point. And I think this is the first time we've really seen an agency of that scale take a step into that standard. And what maybe addressing that first question or the previous question around standards, that doesn't tell you how to do it. So it is probably as open a standard as you get when it comes to data.
Keri, thanks.
Can I
thanks
jump
for
in?
that.
Sorry, Adam.
Yeah, that's all right, Kate.
Sorry.
Go. Yes, go for
A
it.
quick one. I suppose one of the things, I'm a technical person myself, and we heard in Gavin's kind of intro, and Keri, you as well, that it's not just about the technical, it's about the people, it's the governance, it's the ecosystem that the digital twin sits in. And so I'm not a massive person for discussion of standards, because I still think there's a lot of work for us to do around governance, and even really simple things like data sharing. Yes, it would be great if everything could be open data, but we know that that isn't ideal for privacy and other concerns within the built form. So I think there's still a lot more work to be done and knowledge uplift around data sharing, data governance, all of those things that need to be there to really operationalize all those standards.
Yeah, thanks, thanks, Kate. And as much as I love standards, as some of you know, we could go all day on standards, and we won't. This Friday we have a deeper dive workshop where we're going to get stuck into sort of how the draft Australia-New Zealand digital twin strategy is sort of playing out, and one of the breakout sessions is purely going to be around standards. So for those that want to roll up their sleeves and get involved, check that one out. A couple of questions I've got here in the question box team that I'd like to go to. While that's happening in the background, next question. The next question has come up on the screen here. What do you think might be holding you back to thrive even more? Because it seems as though from the first question, the majority of our audience are working in digital twins now. So we'd just love a little bit of feedback there on what might be holding you back to do more, to do better, to build sort of thriving opportunities. So whilst that's happening, and we'll come to that in a moment, let's head to the Q&A for a moment. Chris asks, what do we mean by strategic standards? Gavin, do you just want to address that one briefly?
Well, yeah, I think it's just really, it highlights that framework. What do you need? So like I said, there's standards for building information modeling, there's standards for geospatial, there's standards for IoT. What framework do you need to bring in to a place to allow your twin to succeed? So what problems are you trying to solve? Is that from a strategic level, a management level, and a technical level? So really framing it out. So whoever asked that question, so I think a good example of that is ISO 37106, which was based on PAS 181. So that created a framework for smart cities strategy. So it would be something along that lines, and to provide that framework that is a consistent approach in terms of putting together your digital twin program. And this is what the beauty of standards is. It brings that capacity and capability that there's a consistency for doing things, and it also provides in terms of that capability within the market. So yeah, check out 37106 if you want something equivalent, which the digital twin strategic standard. And again, another plug, Adam, there's the City Deals for standards, which we talk about that strategic process technical, and a lot of those standards in there are equally applicable from a digital twin perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gavin. George makes an interesting comment. George says, I'm not convinced that the panel has a handle on what we are doing with all of this. George, if you want to elaborate a bit more, that would be great. but he does go on to ask another question. What does a top-down governance approach from government look like when it comes to digital twin? Now, Kate, I don't want to steal your thunder in the next session where we've got state government and federal government, but does someone want to sort of address broadly sort of governance a little bit? Who wants to have a play with that?
Well, I was going to jump in, Adam, and say I will ask Tim in the next session that exact question.
That's all right. Well, we can roll that. We can roll that over.
Well, I suppose, I mean, Julian mentioned before some of the excellent work that's been coming out of the Centre for Digital Built Britain in regards to kind of providing some leadership at a national level. I think that the question in Australia is, where will it come from, or where could it come from? And I don't have a firm answer on that.
Question mark. Yes. That's right. Watch this space. Okay, let's go to this question that's on the screen now. Kind of what might be holding us back? Lack of client demand. Let's have a look at the range here. Okay, so lack of client demand seems to be, yeah, right in the middle there. This is on a scale of 1 to 5. What was that one? Lack of clarity, definition, standards. That seems to be a big one. The cost, real or perceived, about the middle. Capability. Wow. Okay. So that obviously came out as one of the, well, the largest there in terms of that little temperature test. What might be holding us back? Our capability. Friends on the panel, where are we at with capability? Do you agree, disagree, or otherwise with some of these results that have come through on the survey? Surprising or not?
I'll jump in again. Sorry, I won't jump in on the next question. Capability is one that really, I'm really passionate about it, and it's something that I have heard from a lot of FrontierSI government partners. There's a lot of public servants who absolutely understand the benefit of the digital twin. You know, their job, Richard, as you said before, their job is to make decisions and policy, and everyone wants to do that in the best way they can, driven by data. But there's a big uplift that's required to understand what that looks like and how to do it. The capability to even procure services that might help you do a proof of concept just isn't there. And so at FrontierSI, and I'm sure, Adam, that you're hearing in the Smart Cities Council, there's a hell of a lot of people that just want to, you know, uplift their understanding so that they can get into the game.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a bit of a conversation so far around challenges, blockages, and what's holding us back. Let's turn to the next question, and let's look forward. Let's talk 2021. Let's talk priorities for 2021. How would you prioritize the following 4 things? So this is one where we want to sort of talk about solutions and improving outcomes. So I've just noted down here 4 generic potential priorities: creating standards, building industry capability, documenting use cases, working on the business case for government. I was thinking of putting a 5th one in around technology, but in my personal view, I've never really seen technology as a barrier or a blocker or a challenge. It's all those other things. So let's see how that moves around a little bit. While that's happening, I'd like to ask the panel this question. 2021, what do you think some of the priorities are? What are the sort of solutions that we need to move forward to make sure that we're building opportunity and really trying to sort of catalyze a thriving digital twin marketplace? Panel, who'd like to go first? 2021 and priorities.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just jump in. So I think from the standards perspective, we've had a couple of industry sessions where we've come to a bit of a position on standards. I feel that with the rites of passage where the UK standards are released, and then that passage goes to ISO. I think we seem comfortable in terms of to see what Centre of Digital Great Britain to assess that first. So I think from my perspective, I see business case and use cases interlinked. So as part of developing a business case, you need to document what those use cases. I think that's still in that stage, and it's interesting. Even the previous slide in terms of lack of around the client demand. I wouldn't say that we're seeing a huge client demand at the moment for pure digital twin. We're still seeing clients demand digital engineering or building information modeling, but I'm not seeing a huge element, especially a lot of the work that we do is in that sort of early business case strategic work that hasn't filtered down into that. So I still think we still need to define and build up that strategic narrative within industry and with government to allow that top-down approach. So yeah, business case development I still think is really important, but we need to implement, to actually demonstrate what that use case is. So it can't be just a theoretical business case. We have to actually do some proof of concepts to actually test and feedback them.
Gavin, are you saying our digital twin narrative is too technical at the moment?
Yeah,
pick that up in your tone.
Yeah, 100%. We're not strategic enough in terms, and what I mean by that, we don't align our policy strategic interventions to our digital twin intervention as one. So we're still very much focused in that technical narrative, and hence the need to engage. We're seeing New South Wales, Queensland, and Victoria in terms of looking at what this means. But the opportunity is not only from a state government, it's also opportunity for departments, agencies as well to think about what their own twin looks like as well, and owner operators as well, private sector as well, got huge opportunities.
If I build on that, I think also we've seen a lot of pilots and we can make those pilots into strategic pilots and make them, business as usual, embed them. But what we're probably not seeing is joining all of those together. So whilst we might have this library of use cases, that woven thread that says, where's the example of seeing this end to end, where someone has just got every part of their value chain, enabled by digital, so that we can track that digital need, and using information to trigger the need. How does that get built through the design, through the construction, into operations? How does the data in operations and performance actually get used to inform the need again at the start of that life cycle? And how are we enabling our people from a digital perspective? How are we wrapping all of that governance banner from a digital perspective, so that we can actually see the full blown version, and I think that's what people are hungry for. They've seen the use cases, they've seen the pilots, but they want to see the big bang. And if you kind of think about where we are, we talk about COVID's accelerated us a number of years into the future from a digital perspective. So why not be ambitious? Why not say, instead of saying what's your priority for 2021, why not bring the priority for 2024 into 2021 and accelerate that and make it a lot more real sooner?
Richard, Julian, yeah, from a 2021 perspective, that's Lendlease's agenda. So we don't start the conversation saying we need a digital twin. We start the conversation is how we can be better at what we're doing, i.e. we're more productive, we're more efficient, we generate essentially better outcomes in better assets, and obviously more product, more profit for us. So our sense is, how are we driving that digital thread, right, from development, identifying what the building asset want and needs are, through into design, through into delivery, through into operational asset management, right? And so each one of those develops use cases. An example might be, how do I transmit a HVAC ducting directly to a manufacturer without going through a schematic or a detailed manual shop drawing processes? Can I use the digital twin to take that design straight through to machinery without human hand intervening? Because obviously every time you have a human hand intervening, it introduces inefficiencies and potential mistakes. So all of these use cases are being lined up right across that value chain. And we talk in terms of how we can utilize both business, process, and people better to do what it is that we do. And that's our focus for 21, just continuing on that treadmill.
So Richard, is it fair to say, and we've got a question here about that, you know, we've heard a lot about government, what about private sector companies and developers and builders? So is it pretty clear, this is going to be an obvious one, but the business case for digital twin for Lendlease is crystal clear, obviously, given what you've launched this year and the work you're doing?
No one's asking us for a digital twin. What people are asking us is, how can I be more efficient with my supply chain? How can I, you know, have materials turning up to site on the right time? How do I avoid design mistakes? How can I be better coordinated? You know, how can we, you know, we look at, you know, productivity rates in our industries, it's not improved, right? How can we reduce waste? How can we be more sustainable? Those are the questions our business are asking us. What we as response to those questions are using and saying, hey, look, you know, if we were to take this approach of using, you know, models and data banks that have sufficient information to make database decisions, then that's going to help us be better than what we are today. And that's what it's all about for us, right? Is using the tech. Now we've fallen on this idea of digital twin technology, and that is by driving better quality information at a higher fidelity, i.e. a higher resolution, we're making better decisions, right? And when we haven't got that fragmented thread, right? And we're working with that. And so we have to help the ecosystem, because Lendlease can't do this on its own, right? It needs government, it needs the ecosystem, it needs the supply chain, it needs everybody to participate and uplift, right, with this view of getting better information into our models.
Can I just build on that? Oh, sorry, Adam.
Well, I was gonna, I want you to say what you're going to say, Kate, but just put this one in your back pocket. We'll come back to it. And I acknowledge that everyone on our panel, of course, is from the private sector, but what Richard has just said in terms of Lendlease's approach and the why, okay, the why and where digital twin came into the picture and how it's part of the solution, is that the thinking we're seeing from government as well? I'd love some comments on that, but Kate, you might want to start.
Yeah, it does kind of build on my comment, Adam. Mentioned it's the whole ecosystem. So it's not enough that the companies that are designing and constructing are engaged in the digital twin agenda. There's also the people like the building surveyors that are going to check off that what was built was what was in that design. And then that information is, of course, important to the owner operator of the asset, but also to the parts of government that are responsible for overseeing that building and that construction and that part of the economy. And I think one of the real examples that we all would have read about in the news this year are the buildings in Victoria that had combustible cladding. Simple questions that the community might expect the government to know which building has what type of cladding. In future, if we did have a full supply chain that actually engaged in this digital data agenda, and I think people have said before, it's not just about the geometry, there's all of this other information that needs to come along. In future, we might be able to answer those questions, but it's going to take a whole heap of people that right now, unfortunately, or maybe are still in reality not collecting and creating that digital data.
Kate, thanks for that. We have an interesting comment in the Q&A box here around, and I'm trying to find it now. It's gone a little bit. Oh, here it is. Here, Tim makes a great point. Keri, very interested in your thoughts here, and also the rest of the panel. Could New Zealand have a leadership advantage here with digital twin, as we don't have a federal system? Keri, or anyone else on the panel, thoughts on that?
I do actually suspect that might be the case. So it's very interesting just maybe going back to the Waka Kotahi, the AMDS example, this is a nationally applicable standard that will affect every regional council, every local authority that wants to manage its roading assets and anything that intersects with it in the future. And I think that this is, there's a very long-term implementation plan, obviously, with what they're wanting to achieve, and whether or not or how long it takes for that standard to be weaved into things like contracts, and and or whether it will radically change the way that we build new infrastructure and how soon that might be. But I believe that this is one of the initiatives that might well give us a head start. And also, of course, it is underpinned by government policy. So possibly, personally, of course, I think that would be a fantastic thing. Very interested in the session that's coming next, as to how this will align with the new spatial strategies, because I really think the two need to go hand in hand. But I think it's a great start. Yeah.
Can I build off that word you just highlighted there, Keri, spatial, and I want to talk about the sort of the nuances between digital twin and different sectors, little clicks, and as we all know on the panel here, and of course more broadly, digital twin's been around for a long, long time. Okay, so aerospace sector, defense, mining, digital twin, full, I'm sure all of you do what I do, which is subscribe to Google alerts on digital twin, and every morning it's the same 4 kind of articles that come through, and it's another digital twin commission for an offshore oil rig or a pipeline or a mine somewhere. I would probably make the comment that in Australia, I can't speak to New Zealand, but in Australia, a fair portion of government-led leadership around digital twin has been sort of from the spatial sort of sector, or our friends in the spatial sector. Is this, and this is not a competition, okay, but we're putting a fine point on spatially enabled digital twins versus digital twins. Does anyone care to comment around this sort of categorization or compartmentalization of digital twin? I mean, my view is, well, it's got to be spatially enabled anyway, right? So there's kind of no point going there. However, we are where we are in 2020, and we have spatially enabled digital twins, and we have digital twins. Does someone want to talk to me about that? What's going on there?
Do you want the spatial mafia, as I'm called?
Well, I saw Keri and Kate laughing, so yeah. Sorry, Keri, you go.
You ask the question to the spatial people, you'll get a spatial answer. I don't know. I think I'm laughing because it reminds me of the conversation we previously had around BIM. And so when you're sort of saying, oh, we're creating a BIM model of this, and I'm saying, great, where does it sit contextually? Because everything has a place somewhere. So I think personally, I fail to see how you cannot have a spatial digital twin as your absolute. It has to be that. And I think the key is the context and the relationships that context spatially creates, and or otherwise. So I think I don't see a separation. And I also wonder if the same is true when you're talking about the data capture element. So, that is essentially a spatial exercise, particularly for retrospectively creating digital twins of existing assets. You have to spatially capture that data. I fail to see how there can be a separation, personally.
Well, maybe it's a non-spatial person. I'll give a balanced view on that. I think we've got to accept the leadership position taken by the spatial crew, effectively. So the ANZLIC created their own set of principles, which was based on the Gemini principles, and they've notated them as the spatial enabled principles. I think that's great. Kudos to them, and they've moved that forward into the respective states. So we've got to accept that they've got a ring of responsibility within their own spatial area, so they've branded that effectively for their area. Now, if we took the other set where the UK government have created a digital twin, and they're factoring that the many different sectors will tie into that. I think it's just evidence of where we are at in terms of naming and badging this, that the spatial community have really taken this leadership, and it's a natural progression for them anyway, because they're doing this already. They're integrating, they're connecting, they're visualizing data sets, 3 tenets of the digital twin capability, and then moving on forward. So they're in a fantastic place to build because they've got that capability. I think what we've got to think about moving forward is not just focusing on the capital delivery world. And I think this is where we do a lot of, we've got to think about, if you look at the bubble diagrams, I'm sure many people have seen that presented around CapEx, OpEx, service delivery, the huge opportunities in service delivery, service provision. How can we drive efficiencies? And touching with Richard's perspective, no one's asking for a digital twin, but what they're asking for is better productivity, reducing waste, more value, bringing together better outcomes for the public. They're the sort of things that we need to be driving. I'm probably not too worried about the name. I'm probably more focused about what is the outcomes that we can get. And I think we've got to start looking, we're going to grow this so it doesn't become BIM 2.0, is how do we start in order getting better outcomes in that service delivery and operations.
Yeah, and to add on to that, Gavin, it's a good point, because then when you say I have a digital twin, by saying I have a digital twin, by in its effect infers that you're getting those good outcomes. And that's why people want one, right? And yeah. So, you know, that's where I think we're trying to drive from, right? So if I've got a digital twin,
someone else will say, someone will say it's a 3D laser scan, some people say it's a BIM file,
it shouldn't actually matter. It shouldn't actually matter. What you're driving for is giving you sufficient information to produce those business outcomes, right? And so whether it's, as you said, whether it's a BIM model or it's a fully one-to-one, fully rendition, high resolution, you know, physical materials are in there as that, as long as it's answering the right question for you and driving those outcomes, that could be your digital twin, right? And so I think, as you said, it's important to understand how the standards adopt to that. But given the space question, just very quickly, I was just going to ask, what about a digital twin of a human being in the life cycle assessments, right? Where's space there? I'll leave it with you, Adam, on that.
No, I don't want that.
So you're doing mathematical actors to simulate the performance of an asset analytically. So that's happening already. So you do mathematical actors. So some of the work we're doing with a UK client is that we're actually employing mathematical actors on an asset to understand the performance, to understand what the unintended consequences of that asset being put in place. So I think I'm talking to a couple of things around this policy twin. So how do you enable policy, better policy decision through analysing and simulating data sets? A really good example of that is here in Melbourne. We're all about to eat and drink outside for summer. So what is the impact of closing down the CBD streets for outdoor dining, and understand what the economic impact is by closing all the streets? So you could understand and test that policy through a simulator and understand what those unintended consequences are, as opposed to perhaps what we might be currently doing at the moment, and I don't know, I'm not close to it, is, okay, we're just going to set up some outdoor seating on, we're going to close these roads because this is from a risk mitigation. So we're going back to supporting better decision making by using your data.
I want to sort of ask a final question. We've got 2 minutes to go before Kate takes the reins and leads us into the next hour. I'm going to try and stitch together a number of questions and comments that have come through here around around strategically thinking about issues and outcomes. Obviously, a lot of technical narrative today. You know, if we want to reduce homelessness, if we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, if we want to improve urban heat island effect, if we want to increase human well-being, there is no shortage of outcomes and targets that we as society has is what I'm trying to, I think what I'm trying to say here in terms of a question, I've probably got, we've got time for one comment to this. How do we better link these outcomes that we want that are beyond railways and buildings and sort of, the world that we sort of mix in? How do we link it? How do we get our social scientists to embrace the digital twin? The community workers, that are pounding the pavement, talking to people that are sleeping rough. Is the digital twin agenda truly for everyone, or it's really just for those that are hanging around in the built environment, aerospace or defence business? Has anyone got maybe something that responds to that? I'm trying to stitch together a number of comments here in the chat box.
I have one comment to that, Adam, and look, one of the industries we haven't mentioned local government. Local government are really interested in this topic, and that is one level of government. I'm speaking for Australia here, where those are the people that are providing services to the people on the ground, the healthcare, the kinders, the libraries, all of those things. And I've seen a lot of interest from that sector, and that's not a sector that's flush with cash. They're interested because they can see how it will impact on the services they provide. So I really hope that that's the example that we'll be able to see people making better short and long-term decisions using digital twins.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, friends, that's our time. That's gone very quickly. And that last point, last question, those last comments, Kate made, hopefully a conversation that we can have more of as we move into 2021. But for now, we need to leave it there. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Keri, Gavin, Julian, Richard, Kate, thank you for joining us on this first hour of our opening session, State of the Nation at Digital Twin Week. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And with that, Kate, you're gonna stay on. You're gonna stay online for a moment and actually take over. Take over from me. I'm going to fade off into the background. I'll be here, but Kate, you've got Brian and Tim on the line. I can't see Bruce yet, but I'll let you take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Adam, and thanks to my panelists on the session before. And yes, you're going to get more Kate for the next hour, but I'll keep it brief because I've got some guests with me to help us talk through this topic about activating digital twins. I did call it a spatial digital twin. That's the industry that I'm from, and I'm going to rethink about that after the last session. But first, I'll introduce you to the panelists that I've got with me. Firstly, Tim Mumford. Tim is an engineer, and he's the Director of Industry Innovation and Productivity at Infrastructure Australia. If you're from Victoria, you might know Tim from the excellent leadership that he showed creating the Victorian Digital Asset Strategy, VDAS, and he's now building on that with the federal government. And Brian Nichols. So Brian is, he sits on the World Geospatial Industry Council, and he's the Executive Director at AAM, a geospatial services company with key strengths in data collection, analysis and presentation of geospatial data. AAM work right across Australia, the Pacific region, Southeast Asia and Africa, and hoping that Brian can give us some ideas from that broad experience. And perfect timing, last but not least, Bruce Thompson, who's the Executive Director of Spatial Services in the New South Wales Department of Customer Service. Bruce is the chair of the Australian and New Zealand Land Information Council, ANZLIC, that was mentioned in the previous hour. Which is the intergovernmental organisation for the creation, management and use of spatial data. Bruce is responsible for the New South Wales Digital Twin initiatives that I'm sure you've seen all over the media if you're interested in digital twin. So thanks very much to the panelists today. We're going to start with a question that I've written, but I'm really keen, like Adam did in the last session, to hear from the audience. So continue to put them into the chat and I will get to them and direct them to the panelist. But first, I'm going to hand over to Bruce and just hear a little bit more about about what you're doing. So you've definitely played a leadership role, and we've heard a bit about that on projects in New South Wales, as well as at the federal level through ANSLIC. I thought it'd be good to hear about some of the projects you're working on, with a focus on that collaboration, governance, roles and responsibilities of how you're working with industry and also other organisations.
Thanks, Kate, and apologies for being late. Yes, collaboration and cooperation is probably the most important and fundamental reason for a spatial digital twin. So, you know, I think we've made the point and continue to make the point that you don't get smart precincts or smart cities or smart states or even smart Australia unless you've got a spatial digital twin at the base to tie those things together. So and we're finding that it's all about collaboration and cooperation. Where we're at the moment, people probably know that we did a minimum viable product for the Smart Western City Deal area of about 8,000 square kilometres, covering 8 local governments. That was complete in February. We're now actually involved in building the business case to roll the digital twin out to all of New South Wales. And in doing so, we've lined up collaborators and partners from private sector and from local government and utilities and from other government agencies to help understand exactly what they need from a spatial digital twin and how we can actually deliver that. So, you know, they're doing us the great service of giving us great critical feedback and good constructive advice on the way forward. And that's going to increase significantly as we gear up through the procurement process for the business case coming over the next 6 months or so in its development. I'll stop there, but I'm happy to cover anything I missed in your question, Kate.
No, that's right. We can get back to it, and thanks for that, Bruce. I'll go over onto Tim. So Tim, you've recently moved from state level, and you were involved in the Fisherman's Bend digital twin at the state level, and VDAS, as I mentioned before. I'm really interested to hear what you think the role of the national government is, and there were some questions in the previous panel about this. And where's your role in Infrastructure Australia on activating digital twin initiatives?
Yeah, all really good questions, and ones without answers at the moment, many of those things. And I'd be particularly eager and have been particularly eager on driving the role of the federal government and the Commonwealth towards this in a roll around federation, because I see that there's a massive opportunity. That started, I would say, 4 or 5 years ago with the commencement of these digital twins and Bruce's great work. And, you know, the collaboration between infrastructure works and those spatial digital twins. And I think we're starting to see, and I think Gavin mentioned in the last session, those two worlds are starting to combine. It's not really so much about spatial data, or it's not so much about infrastructure. It's about how these two environments meld together. And it comes, Kate, exactly to what you said about cladding. That's a classic use case, and one that's really contemporary and really important for everyone, as well as Opal Tower, where people need less geometrical representations of, they don't need geometrical representations of cladding. They need to know where it came from and what it was made of, and ultimately where it was placed on the actual building itself. And that's a classic example of where these two worlds can be combined. In terms of what I would like to see the federal government doing moving forward is playing that federation role. It is working with the states, driving some consistency, setting the pace around vision, a roadmap of what good looks like in the future, and, you know, eventually seeing the product in the flesh, but also seeing this as a massive development and an economic development opportunity as an export. You know, many of the experts that we have in BIM are ex-UK. And, you know, the UK effectively wrote the standard on BIM, 1192 migrated to 19650 with pretty much zero changes. So I would like to see Australia be that entity I would like Australia to be the world leader and export this product. And as Bruce rightly points out, it's about collaboration to get there. It's not so much about you know, one person doing it, because we don't have all the answers. And I'll take a leaf out of Richard's comment earlier. Both government as well as industry have a role to play. And I think the time in 2020, despite its challenges, is now. The time to act is now for all the governments and industry to see a vision and to act on it and to implement it.
Thanks, Tim. Actually, a great introduction to talking to Brian. There was a comment in the previous session as well. You know, it seems to be government focused. You've got a very successful company in the private sector. Really interested to hear more about how you've been involved. Where are you seeing some of the drivers? And how do you think that, you know, is the industry ready? We're just waiting for government, or, you know, where are you at?
Yeah, thanks Kate and everybody. So from the AAM perspective, we've been involved in sort of spatially enabled digital twins for a number of years, although it's probably only the last, I don't know, 2-3 years we've been calling them digital twins. Before that, they were 3D models, 3D urban models, etc. But probably two classic areas that we've been involved in. The first is probably local government. Local governments have long built 3D models of their cities. You know, in the early days, they were often for visualization only. But I think, to be fair to local government, there's some great examples of local governments across Australasia who do really great work with these fundamental 3D building models. I've noted here cities of Brisbane, Wellington City in New Zealand, Sydney, Melbourne, Auckland Regional Council do some great stuff there. So typically we're involved in helping those clients build the data, that 3D spatial data. Sometimes we're also involved at the other end with the sort of 3D GIS systems. So that's one area. The other area for digital twins for us over the last few years, and this has grown strongly, again, we didn't start calling them digital twins, but probably this sort of concept of scan to BIM in the construction sector, where we're going out and conducting an as-built survey of an existing building, whether that's a heritage building or whether that's a construction site. We're capturing existing situation, often modelling that to LOD 2, 3, even 400 under the IFC standards. So we've sort of been involved from those two classic cases of sort of state government, local government, but also from that sort of digital construction. But like in the previous session and the earlier comments now, you know, we sort of see that we're just playing our sort of bit part in the whole thing, and there's so much more that can be done if we can sort of bring government, business, and academia, I think, together into the story.
So Bruce, thanks Brian. That leads on to kind of hearing a little bit more about where you're taking the digital twin in New South Wales. I understand that you mentioned before a range of government partners and industry. Do you want to just tell us a little bit more about why those organisations want to be involved and why they're spending time working with you on this initiative?
Yes, thanks, Kate. So if I give the example, we have a sort of fairly major property developer and their consultants in effect as a small consortium wanting to develop a shared, secure workspace with government. And you know, the use for them comes in two parts. They want to be able to securely share their data with their consultants and maintain a single authoritative source as opposed to distributing documentation. But secondly, in this case, you know, they're developing a 400-hectare precinct with billions of dollars of infrastructure going in over the next decade or so. But there's a major corridor redevelopment from Transport for New South Wales right alongside. So what they're really interested in is saying, how can we expose our design data and our precinct data to Transport for New South Wales, and how can we in return be able to rapidly and simply and easily secure data from Transport for New South Wales, so that we can actually work together on this. So it's just freeing up the processes. Early days for that one, but really very satisfying so far to see that's progressing and what's going on. And then similarly, we have arrangements with the 8 local governments in that area for sharing data, starting to work through with how we share infrastructure data from energy and water providers. And probably most critically, and this is more from a natural hazards point of view, perhaps an infrastructure, but they're both equally valid, is what's happening with telecommunications infrastructure data, and how we're working with the Australian Communications Alliance to free up access to telco data that can be used for infrastructure planning and delivery, as well as for emergency management and other uses. So there's a range of different sort of agreements and things in place at varying stages of effectiveness at this stage, but it's looking very promising.
Great. So I will encourage people to ask some questions, and I will start asking some from the chat. Brian, you mentioned academia, and Nizar is just interested to hear about where you think the academic sector can contribute, and what are some of the things that you've kind of worked within that space?
Thanks, Kate. Well, I think that just to go to the use case first, the one that we've been involved in, which is quite prominent, is the Fisherman's Bend example, where the University of Melbourne's taken a leadership role with the Victorian government. I think that's actually on the next session coming up this afternoon. Our role in that one was again on creating foundation spatial data. But I think that was a great example of the government, the Victorian government, private sector, our company and several other private sector companies were involved, along with the University of Melbourne, bringing together, I guess, was it a demonstrator or a prototype? So I think that's a great example. I think what we need to do now is find ways to go back and look at what worked from that, what didn't work, what do we need to improve that, more importantly, to scale that. So I think on the technical side, there's always technical stuff. I think on the other side for academia and business and government is we still have to look at these. I think we understand that the digital twin is a piece of foundation infrastructure. I think we need to look harder at IP and licensing and procurement models to get the balance right. The classic case, I think Bruce was alluding to, some infrastructure corridors and so forth. Often in our sector, we'll be asked 5 times to do the same survey for a piece of infrastructure, and 7 other companies will be asked, how do we get that model right so that, we get the fundamental digital infrastructure in place, and then that services the whole supply chain. So I think there's examples both on the technical side, but also on that, I guess, the policy, governance, leadership side as well.
Can I add to that, Kate? And Brian's exactly right. I think they've definitively got a role to play, and I guess it's an encouragement to anyone from academia here to play that role and to step up, if you will. I would say 2 major roles on top of what Brian said. One is that thought leadership. It's thinking ahead of the curve, ahead of where we're at in terms of implementation, thinking where do we need to be. Like a prime example of this might be standards. It might be just definitions. Like there is no definition really for digital twin. There's no real definition, to be honest, for digital engineering, nor there is for BIM. And to be honest, it'll change over time. And so that interest and that thought leadership and challenging us to work harder is definitively a role, because in many cases, we're just so fixed on delivering what we can, let alone thinking about tomorrow. The second role, and I think everyone in this group will labour it probably more than I will, is around that next generation of that capability and capacity. Absolutely, academia has a role about feeding the engine. Just like digital twins are massive consumers of data, they are also massive consumers of capability and capacity, and they are definitively reliant on that. And so engineering degrees, architectural degrees, draftspeople degrees, spatial degrees absolutely need to be digital as first and foremost, because what that does is it challenges us, it challenges industry to move away from vector-based, from paper-based. We need people to come in and say, why do you work like that? It doesn't seem to make sense to me. We need almost like a cacophony of those people to get us over the line to change. So I would say two big roles on top of what Brian said.
Mm.
If I can add to that too, Kate, following Brian's point, the strategic shift from my perspective here is from what I would call campaign acquisition to incremental acquisition. So, you know, the days of Wales government going out and flying the whole state at 0.5 metre every 7 years, whether we need to or not, are gone. We're now looking at the 3% of the cadastre that's in the development pipeline, and looking at partners in the industry, looking at how we can get that business model right, so that if Brian or someone is flying part of that area, that we can register that into the base and incrementally improve it, rather than government just doing it as a campaign measure, which is, you know, generally ineffective anyway by comparison. So a business model that allows people to register the most current information in and make it available as a single authoritative source for others is part of that. Is part of working this forward. There's got to be a commercial return for the entity that's done that, and we've got to figure that out. But there's a major way forward for industry to collaborate with government in terms of acquisition that changes from our existing model.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, Brian, you know, the example that you were talking about with the scan to BIM, you know, you just look at the scale of some of the visions that we have for digital twin. No one could afford to capture really detailed data of the existing built form. It's only going to be the newly developed that we're going to have that really intricate level of detail. But the question is, what is the information and level of data that we need to make decisions, or what is that kind of foundational level of data that is going to be useful, maybe at a precinct, a city, a region, or even a national level. And Bruce, that brings me on to another question I've got for you. I was listening to a podcast where you were talking as ANZLIC chair about your vision for a national digital twin. And I just want to hear about what that might look like, and, you know, how's it going to add value? Why is that your vision?
I mean, I guess the fundamental point, which is really basic, is that we are one nation. And people and companies operate across borders. So it's up to us to get standard technical specifications, standard contracts, standard acquisition cycles, standard approaches that mean that people working in Brisbane don't have to relearn what they're doing if they're working in Victoria or South Australia. That's one of the fundamentals. The next one, of course, is cost. You know, why build things 7 times? Why not organise and get things done? You know, we've had this is a chronic problem for government. You know, we have different procurement cycles, different platform life cycles, different political agendas. All these things conspire to stop us from collaborating fully as we want to. That doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to try. And with Spatial Digital Twin, you know, there's 3 levels of collaboration or cooperation to get to national. The first is that foundation spatial data framework, and that's pretty much there. You know, we have a we can always improve the quality, but there is a nationally consistent approach to the FSDF, and going from 2D to 4D doesn't change that. It'll just, you know, it'll be varying levels of quality. Then there's the need for standard collaboration environment, how we share the data and make it accessible. And, you know, that could be done 7 times or once. And certainly my preference would be for it to be done once. But we've built something in New South Wales, you know, because we have to, because that's where we are in our cycle. And other states are doing the same. So how we get there is something else. Probably the least essential component for standardisation is the visualisation and front end. You know, we are going to see hundreds, if not thousands, of different modelling services, visualisation services, presentation services, all hooking into, if we get the sharing platform right, the visualisation tool is just one of many. So we've cracked the FSDF really. We've got a common approach to that. It's now time to step up into that space and see what we can do there. And if we got that right and did that and still had energy to spare, then we'd look at standardising around the tools that come in and make use of them as we go forward.
Yeah. And look, great answer, Bruce, and made a lot of sense to me as a spatial person, but it did, you know, we're very familiar with the concept of Foundation Spatial Data Framework, FSDF, but we do have a lot of kind of language barriers between domains. And so, Tim, I just wanted to talk to you about how do we break down some of these barriers? It was mentioned in the last session as well, but, you know, really fundamentally, how do we as a digital twin community work together to break down those divides that we have?
Yeah, it's not an easy one, and to be honest, if it was easy, we would have done it by now. Bruce is right. It is very much about that value proposition. In my mind, it's about that collaboration. It's about selling it as access to data and information to inform decisions. It just so happens that that data and information is structured and spatially located in a format that happens to be called a digital twin. It could be called anything. It could be called, I don't know, a cup of coffee or a giraffe or anything. It doesn't really matter what it's called. It's just how it's formed so it's most easily digestible. It's also finding those use cases, and I guess I wouldn't say attaching, you know, a horse to a wagon in a sort of contemporary way that is really important at the moment or contemporary. It's more finding what those use cases are and seeing what those opportunities are. And, you know, Victoria's a good example of that. You've found really good use cases for AI with finding pools to inform risk and safety related discussions. Bruce, I'm sure you're getting a lot of questions about, you know, use cases for your spatial digital twin. In many respects, some of those things we can predict. And to your question, Kate, like what information do we get at each iteration to inform the digital twin? Anyone that says that they know that, I think, is probably lying. And so the approach to do that, it needs to be sort of, what do we need now to inform decisions versus what will we need tomorrow, and how do we sort of structure the information to have as few regrets as possible. And I take a leaf out of, you know, Simon Vaux's book in this regard, who led the work for Transport for New South Wales. He commonly says, you know, we used to call it a smart TV, and now it's just a TV. In many respects, we probably wouldn't have thought about how we used TVs today, like when they were sort of first invented. And the same applies for ATMs, the same applies for smartphones or just phones. And so in many respects, it's very hard to predict an exponential growth curve. Like, humans aren't very good at it, that's for sure. And so I think it's structuring information to a point that informs as many, but doesn't preclude other uses and nesting, and also getting the right people in a room to make a balanced conversation about, does it fit as many purposes as possible? So this is kind of where, you know, spatial and cadastral and infrastructure and building come together. You know, we all have a completely different definition of LOD as a prime example, but then seeking unity on what LOD means to one person versus another is critically important, because at some point we're all talking the same language, then we can all work together on moving forward on what that means, and rather than debating semantics, it doesn't help anyone.
Brian, did you want to comment on this one?
Oh, I think that Bruce and Tim have covered it very well. I mean, just maybe to summarise, we've sort of picked up on the concept of the FAIR principles, which I think is more generic IT than digital twin. But for those, most people will be familiar, but it's about findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So when we're sort of talking about this, whether we're talking with our clients or whether we're talking with, you know, government partners like Bruce, you know, we're sort of urging our stakeholders to think about that, and it ties in with what Tim said. You know, it's sort of, and Bruce, you know, we're sort of the spatial sector. Our job is to create this foundation framework. The Singapore government 5-6 years ago talked about 3D maps as just foundation for a smart city, and I don't think I've heard a better, you know, a better summary than that. You know, we make this incredible 3D based map, and then that's the foundation for doing a whole bunch of stuff. And if you put it there and you make it findable and accessible and interoperable, then stuff will happen. And I think, you know, all the different sectors, all the different use cases that even you can't predict there, Tim, are gonna come out from that. So that's probably our take on it.
But I guess the challenge, and having been in government, and Kate, I think you'll understand this, and Brian, having worked with government, and Bruce, having worked in government too, it's very hard to sell this idea of just trust us, you know, that there'll be use cases and it will be, there will be merit in doing this sort of stuff. It's very hard to sell that idea upwards. But Brian, you're right. You know, if someone tried to predict the use cases or tried to monetize the benefits of, say, Google Maps, holy smokes, like that would be worth trillions, I would probably argue in terms of productivity benefits and where knock-on effects for the whole globe, actually. And so, you know, as government, we struggle to sell this unbounded benefit discussion.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one, and I'm in the private sector, and we understand and we sympathise with government. But I think as an industry, we've got a responsibility to get this message up between, like I said before, business, government, academia, and you know, to steal from my friends in Singapore again. I think it was the finance minister in Singapore who was a techie actually, and his mantra was "Build it and they will come." I think that's easier in Singapore than Australia. But I do think we've got an opportunity now, and even the whole COVID thing, I think, gives us an opportunity to test, you know, what we've been doing business as usual, and go, no, we can do better than this. So I actually think we're in really great shape. There's been some good stuff done, and hopefully, if we can all come together, we can take those business cases up to government, whether it's state or federal, and do some really good stuff.
Yeah, and look, I think, you know, build it and they will come. I mean, I obviously 100% believe, but I think we need to have some really great use cases to build those business cases. Isla has asked a question. It's not just about finding enough, you know, finding a good one rather than saying the potential is limitless. So Bruce, I was wondering if there's a use case that stands out for you that you've been hearing about.
Look, what's come through from our partners is in three broad areas: IoT, planning, and infrastructure delivery. So people with IoT networks that want to place them in space, people with planning or design tools that want to base a proper generative design on an elevation model and a zoning scheme that's authoritative. And then infrastructure delivery of its own sort. But I just want to offer out a use case that, you know, at first glance may not appear to be right in the frame for digital twin, but clearly is, and illustrates a couple of key points. And that was it's the COVID thing, and in particular the Victorian border permit application system. So you're in a situation there where there's a border zone that needs to be defined. That's spatial for a start. So you're either in the zone or you're not. And then you've got tens of thousands of people daily, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90,000 people daily applying for permits, of which there are 12 or 14, they vary all the time, different permit types. And the business logic of that process means you've got to know exactly where the person came from and where they're going. You've got to have their origin address and their destination address. And that's what ties it to the digital twin. Now, if you can imagine someone in Service New South Wales attempting to process 40,000 address pairs manually, saying, oh, that's not in the zone, that's in New South, that is coming to New South Wales, that's in the zone, it's not coming to New South Wales. It's simply not even remotely possible to handle that volume of transactions at a spatial digital twin address data set. And secondly, to get back to our cooperation and national
data set,
it's got to be national, because half those addresses that we're validating and geocoding on the fly are from Victoria, or close to half, with a good smattering of 10% from the other states. So two things that come out of that, the geocoding, the address validation and geocoding capability is on the critical path for a high profile, high risk, high reputation loss transaction like issuing COVID border permits. That's the first thing that we're moving now into becoming part of that path, as opposed to a reference data set on the side. Second is it's national, and third is you couldn't do it any other way. So that is one of the use cases that we will be putting into the business case and going forward. Perhaps not a big dollar saving, but simply stuff you couldn't do any other way.
Absolutely, and I think there'd be examples from all over the country about people that suddenly realise that the world doesn't finish at the border, and that decisions are going to have to be made cross-border. I was working at the Victorian government at the time, and we are in the unenviable state of having being the people that people want to keep out, and South Australia border, New South Wales border, and a whole heap of data sharing discussions ramped up very quickly. Tim, you've obviously, I introduced you as an engineer, and that was just a little private joke to myself, but interesting to hear from that kind of infrastructure perspective as well, where you're seeing, I suppose, opportunity to save money, better outcomes, better decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add on to, just before I launch into that, Kate, adding on to what Bruce said, I think the use cases from our point of view is very much around infrastructure delivery. How do you close a loop, which in a historically unclosed loop fashion for those systems engineers out there. And that revolves around parametric design and design reuse cases, and just general efficiencies about how you handle information. I would say the other big one is around utilities. It's just a big bone of contention for everyone, and it drives a lot of cost for everyone. And it's not just infrastructure, it's commercial, it's residential. Like, I've struck my own services in my front yard 4 or 5 different times from not knowing, and the productivity loss just in that is huge. So I see there's a massive opportunity in terms of strengthening that. In the same breath, I think there's a massive opportunity in e-planning, rules as code. And, there's some amazing companies out there who are already taking the National Construction Code and turning it into rules as code. So you could essentially submit a BIM file and then check whether it was compliant with the NCC. And it would automatically spit out whether that's right or wrong, or guide, the practitioner to where there might be some errors. Massive opportunity and time savings there. I would also argue the same rules as code for planning schemes, as well as planning approvals, better collaboration between building and planning, and then red line markups for closing that loop, as I said earlier. And the final one is around land use planning. And I think Bruce mentioned it, but realistically, a bit of crystal balling. Where do we want to be? What does it look like? How do we use historical assumptions to feed new models and new sensitivities to test where we might be, and essentially shock? You could essentially shock the system virtually and see how it responds. And they do that with emergency management planning in digital twins right now. If there's some sort of event that occurs, how do people get away from the incident? There's no reason why you couldn't do that on a national, or if not a state-based standard, or level. In terms of what I think the big opportunities over the next sort of 12 to 24 months will be, is rallying together, I think, is you know, and feeling like you have some control on what that be, but also working together and releasing things that you don't think are a big issue. If we, you know, if we're willing to let go of our LODs by way of example and adopt someone else's, so be it. You know, if that advances the conversation, you know, we're not particularly wed to them. So I think that will advance the conversation. So I think a bit of give and take, otherwise we're just never going to get there. In the same breath, I think common languages in terms of open standards, I can really speak for BIM here, but I know it's the same for cadastral information systems and land data, probably to a less extent spatial, but I guess pushing software vendors, pushing ourselves, pushing academics, pushing for that new paradigm of what good looks like, and making sure that the conversation from naysayers isn't, well, the standard's not there, or the format's not there, or it doesn't work for me. We've got to get past that, and I think we can get there. I think we just need to sort of spend time on it. We just don't want this to be a technical barrier narrative, because it's not there. It shouldn't be there. Interoperable standards and really driving around open standards, or at least in the interim, asking for two, so proprietary as well as open, just in the interim, and then advancing those open standards as a single conversation. You know, it's also these events, you know, these, and credit to Adam and you, Kate, for sort of organising this session, but it's really important that industry have a chat and government have a chat, and we both understand where we're both at and what the challenges are. And so sharing these ideas, sharing these use cases, putting money on them, understanding who's doing what is so important, rather than us all just sort of being in our holes and working our magic and not talking to anyone, because at the very fundamental level, digital twins, as ubiquitous as that term may be, is about working together and federating information. And then the final one is around, you know, even with your own four walls, working together. So like a classic example in the infrastructure world is clashes. You know, like the use case of BIM kind of came out of clashes, and it's still an issue. So, you know, although, you know, we've driven that to less and less, but there's almost an infinite amount of clashes when we integrate these other functions. So continually working through these and trying to optimize them is key. So, you know, we're going to be busy is probably the overarching comment there, but the end is the end is inside, and in many respects I think we've all got a common vision of what this could look like. We're all going to be wrong, and that's okay too. So I'm looking forward to, I think this is an exciting time and space, and these events I think I only highlight and strengthen that further for me.
Absolutely, thanks, Tim. Now, we've only got less than 20 minutes to go, and I'm going to ask maybe a can of worms. There's been a few comments in the questions around issues like privacy. I know there's some really interesting discussions going on around ethics, particularly in AI, but I think equally apply to digital twin, and risks. So who wants to jump off with a discussion on some of those gnarly topics?
I think it's you, Bruce. You're the government guy. You should start with that one.
I'll give it a crack. I think I'm borrowing from well, certainly borrowing from previous thoughts of others. But the ethical point of view for me around information security and privacy is that it should, in the spatial digital twin, just like everything else, reliably reflect the real world. So if you can walk down the street and you can see it in the real world, you probably should be able to walk down the street and see it in the digital world. But if you walk up to the door and want to go through it, you're going to bump your nose, and there's going to be a pop-up that says, you know, this is a secured area, log in or call this person for access. You know, I just think that, you know, at the kind of very small operational level, in a few years' time, or maybe 5, maybe longer, we will have a digital twin of our buildings, of our own houses, even if we build them ourselves. And if we want a tradie to come in and do a bit of work in the kitchen, we'll let them have access to the digital twin model, and they can measure off that and have a squint and not, rather than getting a ute and drive an hour and a half across town. So we've got the model of privacy pretty much taped in the real world. We simply need to apply it correctly to the digital world so that it stacks up that way. And a lot of that, from my perspective, is what we've spent probably more time on than anything else in building our spatial digital twin. The collaboration portal is designed to allow data custodians or owners, whichever you want to call them, to publish their data and control who sees it and under what conditions. So that's been a fundamental bedrock for us. Without that, we won't get the partnerships and the collaboration and the trust going that's necessary for progress. So that's where we are. And, ours is pretty much a standard Esri portal environment. It's a bit clunky, but we'll work to improve it and get it going. But, it's very much focused around that role-based access and security for reasons of commercial and confidence, sensitivity, and privacy. But still not easy.
What about risks?
I'm not sure that changes very much. I mean, we already qualify our FSDF with quality statements and talk about fitness for purpose. That needs to continue. We just simply need to acknowledge what is the best available source and understand that it won't be perfect, and that we need to treat these data with due care and assessment. So that's that, don't run with scissors argument. You've got to take a bit of a risk with this stuff if you're going to use it at all, as long as you understand the risk you're taking.
Yeah, and I think with that one, Kate, it's really important that we get the right contracts in place as well. This is a bit of a bugbear of ours, where you'll do a job for $50,000, and have a potential liability of $10 or $50 million, which is completely disproportional. So we've got to find ways to, as Bruce say, it is what it is. This is the standard it was built to, and this is the metadata around that information, and it is what it is. So I think Bruce's points around privacy about, if you can see it in the street, then you should be able to see it in the virtual world are great. And I think we can, I think again with some good thought leadership and cooperation and collaboration around contracts, we can manage most of these things. I think technically we can do most of what we need to do. So some of this for me is around contracts and how we engage between different sectors and different, between business and government.
And if I could just add in, there's a lot of similarities between a spatial digital twin and the stock exchange. And you've got people that have got something to sell. You've got people that have got something to buy. You've got value adders sitting on the edge, stitching things together and making new products. You've got regulators. There's no doubt in anyone's mind about where liability sits when you venture into the stock exchange. And when you buy or sell shares, there's no one there to hold your hand, and you can't say I was misinformed. Those same rules and practices need to apply once it comes to data use, because the two things are interchangeable. Data and the stock exchange are not dissimilar in what we're doing.
I think it's important to add too that no one's got all the answers, and I think it's not a reason to try. And I hear this sort of legal argument all the time. And admittedly, I think the legal fraternity or community haven't really kept up with a lot of things. I remember conversations about, autopilot on Tesla, and if it ran through, the computer or the program decided to, accidentally hit one person versus 10, what's the source of right and wrong and morality here? Like, if we sit and wait for this discussion to come to bear and the legal community to land on it, like, we're never going to progress whatsoever. So it's not a reason not to try. And I think Bruce's comment about the natural bearing, the natural magnetic north, if you will, of what's right and moral is just try to overlay what we currently do now. So, you know, if you were a driver and you had two choices out of two, you know, and you hit one person instead of 10, then, you know, it's still bad and it's still manslaughter, but it's comparatively less bad. And there's a whole bunch of questions about root cause analysis and, you know, were you going too fast and negligence and a whole bunch of other things which are brought up. And so massive credit to people like Michael Haynes from Vanzi on challenging all of us to think about this. And Bruce, you know, I think that's where that conversation really first came up of, you know, legal boundaries and reflecting the rights of those in the physical world with the digital world. But it also brings up a lot of questions about user access and rights and obligations under that. And so I guess it's a summary of saying we don't have all the answers. We're never going to have all the answers today. And this thing will be very iterative. We need to try things, come back a step, but we almost need a degree of morality and what currently happens in the current status quo and how can we best reflect that in a virtual environment. Because if negative stuff does come to bear, and it will, can you defend that decision and the logic to get to that point as compared to none? And so I dare say, and the cars example is a classic one, it's not a reason not to try, because right now the biggest risk in cars is the driver. It's the human element. It's not, and so if we make this leap of faith to going to automated cars, we're going to, I'm throwing a number out there, we're going to halve the amount of fatalities associated with roads. And so that is a net positive in otherwise a legally challenging environment, but it's not a reason not to try.
Yeah, and look, I think, Tim, building on that, there's been a really good comment in the chat around, you know, people's choice. The comment that Nazir made was, you know, the privacy versus convenience, and anybody that uses Google to do a search has given up some privacy for convenience, and we do it every day. And Bruce, your example with the tradie, I would love, when I've just moved into a new house, I would have loved a digital model of this, because I'm in Victoria and I can't get any tradie to quote me on anything for another couple of weeks. So I've got to put up with having no blinds and all that type of thing. I would absolutely trade the privacy for convenience. So I think there's a lot of discussion to be had around choice. Bruce, I know you're working with a particular developer. They're choosing to engage in this because they see that they're going to get benefit out of it, not convenience, actual economic benefit. So I think the argument, the solution would be a combination of mandating particular information, but also people engaging in something where they can actually see some value. And I think that's kind of, you know, where I really wanted to get this conversation to get to, which is government has a role, local, state, federal, the private sector does, and individuals do, because I hear Marie from Data 61 in my head saying it takes a ecosystem to build a digital twin, and I think that's always in my mind when we're talking digital twin, because it's about people getting value and people providing value. So I've got just a couple more minutes because I've got to leave Adam some time to round it all out. Did anyone want to add any final statements?
I think just on that sort of privacy, security one we've talked about, I don't think we should beat ourselves up too much here, because I think we're doing an okay job in Australia. We work a lot with some governments in Southeast Asia and a little bit in the Middle East, and sometimes I think in areas they might be a bit ahead of us. But in terms of having pragmatic views of how the data can be accessed and who can access it, I suspect that Australia and New Zealand might be ahead in that sense. And I think that's an opportunity for us to continue to do good work here, but also to take some of what we do here you know, around the world, just like the UK's done, Tim. I think Australia can sort of take some of this stuff to our region as well, because there's huge opportunities.
I think that's right. I mean, and part of our business is the Emergency Information Coordination Unit that handles a whole bunch of data for emergency management and terrorism and so on. And, you know, working with other jurisdictions and with the Australian government is difficult. Particularly, so, you know, just recently, probably a year or so ago, we went into a process of looking at whether the information should be classified in some way. And it was a lengthy process, but the answer came back was, well, yeah, it probably should be classified. If it is, no one can use it. You know, so you know, the pragmatism won through, and the data is highly secured, but it's not classified in the formal sense that you would perhaps otherwise expect it to be.
Tim, okay, well, fantastic chat with you guys today, and thank you very much for making yourselves available for this. Looking forward to doing a State of the Nation next year and seeing where all of your projects have got up to, Bruce, and seeing how you're going with the feds, Tim, in influencing something from the federal government to provide some leadership in this area. So thanks very much. And Adam, I'll hand back over to you.
Kate, thanks so much for hosting that fantastic conversation. And Brian and Bruce and Tim, thank you as well for providing such great insight and views. This morning, the 2 hours that we've been together, I think has really been quite interesting. And the engagement from the audience, I think the number of questions certainly is a testament to the content that we've been going through. Just sort of finally, before we sign off, I wanted to highlight that this is a very packed week. We have 12 sessions all up at Digital Twin Week. State of the Nation this morning, role of government, reflections was the purpose as we sort of head into our session this afternoon. We'll be going very, very deep with our friends at the University of Melbourne. Tomorrow, first thing in the morning, we head over to the US with our friends at the Digital Twin Consortium, who are bringing a number of their members on to do some feature showcases. We've got a government-only networking session tomorrow afternoon. Wednesday morning, we have our sort of key case study series. So 12-minute case studies covering a whole range of different projects. So really starting to look at solutions and software. And I know there's been a number of questions on the chat today about those technical sort of those technical issues. So that is certainly coming. We go to the UK on Wednesday night. We have the Centre for Digital Built Britain hosting a bit of a roundtable. They're going to be sharing where they're at with their digital framework, their digital twin standards, their digital twin hub, and the culture change program. So keep an eye out for that on Wednesday night. On Thursday, packed day, we have 4 sessions on Thursday. We've got some great projects. We've got a lot going on in water as well, a lot in rail, Highways England. We've got Auckland Airport, more than you can poke a stick at, so to speak. And on Friday, we end up with an interactive workshop, and really encouraging those that want to get more detailed and granular and participate in helping shape a regional digital twin strategy for Australia and New Zealand. We've made a start on that document with an editorial committee and our digital twin task force, and we've got 4 breakout groups that we want to go deep into some of those key areas around how we build a thriving digital twin marketplace in the region across Australia and New Zealand. So look, that's it from us, this first session of Digital Twin Week, the State of the Nation. I wanted to thank you all for joining in. A reminder that a recording of this session will be up on the Digital Twin Hub this time tomorrow, and also on the Smart Cities Council Australia New Zealand YouTube channel that you can go and find. Friends, thanks so much. We look forward to seeing you in multiple sessions across the next 4 days. Thanks for joining us.